Moss. That's what we'll be talking about today is moss. This stuff is really unique. A clump of moss is actually made from a few different types of plants. So you can't look at one big cluster of moss and say, "Hey, look, it's a moss plant." It's made of tons of tiny little plants, and it's like its own miniature forest. So you could walk into a forest and then find a little cluster, a clump of moss growing. And then if you got down deep, if you just got really close down deep and you looked up and you inspected it, you'd say, "Wow, you know what? This isn't one tiny little plant, but just a bunch of other tiny little plants that makes up its own mini microcosm forest in the middle of another forest. Each little clump of moss is like that." Now, moss is incredibly helpful. There are animals that eat moss. There are animals that live under the moss because it stays nice and cool. Um, in fact, one of the mantras that people say um, when they walk across hot coals is you just repeat to yourself over and over and over, "Cool moss, cool moss, cool moss." I was lucky enough to, when I was a kid, go to one of these fire walking things where they train you to have this mantra and you say, "Cool moss, cool moss, cool moss." And then you get barefoot and you walk across hot coals. And as long as you're saying that mantra, it protects you. And you're thinking about the cool moss and you protect your body from burning up and getting blisters all over your feet. And I did it, and it was fine. It was definitely recommended as an interesting experiment. Don't do it at home. We did it as part of a workshop. Um, Moss stays nice and cool. It doesn't need much sunlight. In fact, it prefers the shade. It stays clustered around the base of rocks and trees, and it likes to stay on the ground. And moss does something really wonderful for the trees and all the plants around it, and the entire forest floor, because all the animals are going to benefit from this. It's like a sponge. When it starts raining and that rain starts tumbling down, it can create flash floods, as we experienced recently here in California. If there's too much rain too soon and there's not enough plants to suck it up, you're gonna start to have flooding. The water can only go so much into the ground and into the dirt before the ground is filled with water. And then where does it go? Well, some plants can just suck up that water and retain that water. And moss is one of those plants. Moss not only retains water when the rain falls, but it can also kind of, the way that it's um, the way that it can suck in and breathe in water allows it to, um, even when it's fairly dry out, stay nice and moist and cool. And then the way that it releases that water, um, and the way that it provides shade and cover over the ground allows the ground to stay in a more moist and watery condition so that other plants around it can suck up that water for longer. For instance, say there was a desert, and in this desert is the middle of this desert. There's just one plant. There's just a single cactus sitting there, right? Now, if it rains, the cactus is going to suck up as much water as possible, right? Um, but the rest of the rain is just going to go into the desert and it's going to get lost. It's going to evaporate back out, back up into the air, and you're going to lose that water content. Now, if the cactus were lucky enough to be surrounded by moss, the moss is going to, number one, suck up a bunch of that water, so now there's more water generally in that area, but then also it's going to provide shade and ground cover so that rather than that dry desert heat drying up and evaporating all that water and the moisture going up into the air and into the sky, it's going to stay in the ground for longer. And then when the cactus needs a little bit more water as it's getting hot, it's going to suck up some of that ground moisture around it. Now, moss serves a number of different functions, and it's a really fun thing to touch, you know? Going and into a forest And just touching moss with your bare feet, or just gently touching it and not breaking it with your bare hands, is a magical experience. And if you haven't experienced that yet, get out and find some moss. Moss is pretty easy to locate. It looks like some cushy, velvety, wonderful thing. I'll include some images in here of some moss so that you can see that. And if you get the chance to really experience moss, go sit with it, be still, enjoy the experience, um, be active in nature where possible. Get your hands dirty, literally, and touch the moss. You really can't go wrong. To my knowledge, there's not any poisonous mosses. So really, if you're looking at all towards the ground for carpets of moss, then you should be good, and you can touch it without worry. I hope this video finds you well, and thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow, or more accurately, you will see me tomorrow.